Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now you're welcome along. Wednesday Night Rugby coming at you. So it's busy. We've Heineken Champions Cup this weekend, round of 16. Munster Sharks in Durban, Saturday 12:30. We have Leinster Ulster 5:30. There is Challenge Cup, Benetton against Connacht. And then Women's Six Nations, namely at Musgrave Park in particular. Ireland against France, Saturday 2:15 kickoff. Very happy to say, joined by Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio. Rory, good to see you.
Hey, Joe.
And Grand Slam winner Grace Davitt on the line. Grace, evening, great to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here, Joe.
Let's start with the Women's Six Nations. Wales 31, Ireland 5. For people who mightn't have caught the game, it was 26-0 at half-time. I would say, Grace, in the build-up, listening to various onlookers, they were citing home advantage for Wales, the inexperience in the Irish team, the 16 months plus of Welsh professionalism, and most were predicting a Welsh win. Not many predicted complete domination in the manner of which we saw.
No, and it was really hard to judge. You know, we've seen all the other Six Nations teams perform in the World Cup, and, you know, it's always hard to judge where you're at. And I think that was the key with Ireland, is they hadn't played since Japan tour, where they won one and lost one with a very inexperienced team. And it was a great opportunity for some players to get their first cap. And Ireland had the combined provinces, but all the other, so Scotland and Wales didn't have any of their Prem players, which is most of the Welsh team, in those that league. So it's really difficult to judge Ireland and where they were at. And obviously that first game now against Wales had two difficult games in the World Cup against New Zealand, who are the world champions. So, you know, they have had that cohesiveness as a team. And obviously now we see what level Ireland are at. Other teams are progressing and constantly improving, and Ireland are just starting on that scale.
Roy, I know you saw the game as well. It was a bad start. There was a power deficit to begin with between the two teams, and Ireland were just trapped, first half in particular, couldn't get out of their own half.
Yeah, and sometimes, look, it looks like a power deficit, but there was a technique deficit as well. You know, I think if you are giving up weight to an opposition, you got to find strategies. Like Ireland in the men's side of the game, and I know the men's and women's games are different, but fundamentally a lot of the basics are still the same. If you're giving up size and power to opposition players, then you have to get your technique right, and you have to be able to get low. Ireland were very good at, you know, dominant tackles last year, and didn't back that up at all in this game. They weren't able to get on the front foot in any way in that first half, and it looked like, whether it was that step up in competition from the combined provinces and the fact that they hadn't played together for so long, whether it was the fact they were so inexperienced, whether it was the anticipation of a first Six Nations game, that they just didn't get their prep right in terms of their mental prep, and they weren't ready for the game, and they got blown away in that first 40. And in the second half, look, there is obviously a levelling up as Wales make substitutions and they know they've won the game already. We began to see some of the things that Ireland can do, but it was too late. I do expect them to be better across the tournament, and I don't think they'll be as bad again. Unfortunately, Wales are one of the teams that they think they're able to compete with. So if they're losing heavily to Wales, where does it leave them for this weekend and next weekend? You know, if your scrum's getting blown away in that manner by Wales, that's a real worry when it comes to the two bigger teams in particular. If you're losing collisions across the board, then you know Ireland have a talented backline, but they're not going to get any ball. So some of the tries are very soft. First up tackles being missed, which at international level really isn't excusable. So I can't. It's very hard to put your head in, or yourself in Greg McWilliams and his shoes this week as he tries to fix things. Like, where does he go? It's a little bit like the Wales men in the Six Nations. Like, where do Warren Gatland go after every game? There'll be a different problem, and you know he can probably get that technique stuff right. I think, you know, go lower in the maul might help, you know, stop at source. There are things you can do, but there's so many things to fix in this week with such a short turnaround. It's going to be very, very difficult for them.
Yeah, as Rory says, Grace, Ireland were losing collisions when they did have the ball. They didn't have much of a kicking option, Enya Breen aside, so even when they were trying to get out, it's just really, they were rocking a hard place territory. And then in defence, there seemed to be something very passive about the Irish line for a team that made, as Rory alluded to, the most dominant tackles in the championship last year. Even in their own 22, even on their own goal line, there was a passive aspect to their defending, which was surprising. I kind of anticipated them shooting off the line a bit more and getting stuck in.
Yeah, and this is the thing about defence is it's trust, and you have to trust the players around you, and you need that cohesiveness. And you think the Premiership players, I expected them to come back after very physical games in that English Premiership and set the tone, but it seemed to be that they weren't linking together. There was no real understanding of what it was. Even when we seen this the third try in the first half, it was straight off set piece. It was first phase, and it was a simple skip pass, and Ireland just didn't get up the line. They didn't identify who they had. A lot of the defence, they were not keeping square. They were turning their bodies. They were, showing them the outside, and that just leaves soft shoulders. And even a couple of times, Wales were able to get the ball wide, not because of lack of numbers for Ireland, but because of their space and their identification. And that just all comes with working together, trusting each other and going, move out. I know exactly who I'm taking. And then that working together and coming up hard from the inside. But yeah, and I felt there was one or two, really good tackles. We've seen the likes of Sam Monaghan shooting up, making a good tackle, Linda Jungang, Brittany Hogan, but it was just individual. It wasn't that, oh right, let's come up hard and close them down like we seen Wales do. Wales were very good at coming up hard, closing them down, knowing Ireland didn't have the kick. So yes, you have that upfront base, but they were very smart in how they slowed Ireland down on the ground. They were holding players in, that just a little bit of smarts and just trying to get that little bit of advantage.
And it was very interesting, Grace, pre-game, and I appreciate there is a danger in reading far too much into what's said in the media pre-game, but Greg McWilliams on television made a point of thanking the S&C staff at the high performance unit. Nicola Friday did an interview where they had arrived in Cardiff on the Wednesday, I think, so loads of time, and she was talking about being really well prepared, and so it wasn't like and I'm sure you have some stories to tell about some more ramshackle arrangements where you're probably exhausted by the time you get to kick-off. That was not the case here, and she was talking about the benefits of good preparation. And it was Dorothy Wall who was asked at one stage, what kind of a performance can we expect from Ireland? And the word she used was energised. So I kind of took all those various messages and I thought, okay, well, if nothing else, they'll be very vibrant. But they did look like a team that were flat emotionally or physically, or maybe a combination of both. I don't know, is that inexperience or what was your read on that aspect?
Yeah, because fair enough, they are in S&C and they are getting, I've no doubt, they're real physical. The players that are playing top level, they've S&C now full time. And, the thing about it is Ireland weren't professional bar the sevens over the last few years, but don't cod yourself to think that the girls weren't trained to a professional level and weren't putting all their effort in. Yes, they might not have had the recovery and that would have limited their growth, but they were training very, very hard. But the thing about it is, and Rory alluded to it there, I just think it seemed to be their attitude. It seemed to be the basic skill set. I don't think it had anything to do, yes, S&C is going to improve, but it's the tiny margins. But it was things like that explosiveness off the line to get over the gain line, that evasive of footwork to hit a soft shoulder to try and break a tackle. It's that second support player running hard, so that means I'm taking a one-on-one tackle instead of my outside player being passive, which means I get double hit and driven back. So it's the fight on the ground to get a good body position to ensure a quick ruck. And they're all the little nuances that, yes, you can be physically strong, but if you have a bad support posture coming in to clear out that ruck, that's not going to be a quick ruck. And I think all those little margins, we seen players being held up out wide, and it was Eleanor Snowsill and someone else got in and, held up Aoife Doyle and it was turned over. So that's, that could be something as simple as shelling up before going into contact, using your feet, getting low and driving rather than being caught high, whether that's down to the pass, down to the depth between you and the defence. So it's not all down to S&C. It can be all down to, your body height and decisions that you make, really.
So you're both in agreement, because that's the point you made, Rory. This is about technique every bit as much about anything else.
It would help if you had a couple more athletes like the Welsh tight head. That would be nice if they were coming through the pipeline. But our talent identification system seems to veer towards sevens players who are wingers, flankers and centres and tens, and the best of those get channelled into the sevens programme because the priority is qualifying for the Olympics. So But as Gregory Williams said, I don't think the sevens athletes would have necessarily made a big difference this weekend. But what Ireland don't seem to be able to do, well, they're chasing it, is to try and identify props and type 5 forwards and bring them into the system. So few of the initially listed contracted players were type 5 forwards, so they can train together all they like in Abbottstown. But if your type 5 are not actually part of the overall preparation and are coming in late and haven't played together, then of course your maul's going to suffer. Of course your scrum's going to suffer. If you've got an 18-year-old prop with very, very limited experience of scrummaging at senior level, that's going to come back to bite you in the ass at this level, and it's only going to get worse because Wales are, probably the third best team in this tournament, vying with Italy for that place in the pecking order. So paying the top couple of players to train out Abbottstown is a good thing, but there's so much more that needs to go on in terms of talent ID, in terms of investing in the clubs, in terms of season structures, in terms of the players playing quality games across the year so that they're ready to play at this level, and we're so far away from that in Ireland at the moment. And the combined provinces, that idea down the line, I think, is that the firstly 2 provinces will play against 2 Welsh teams and 2 Scottish teams, and the Welsh, you would think, will try and bring some of those Premier 15s players back for that, but they'll be looking at Ireland going, well, we don't need that's not a competition we need our players to be playing in. Why don't we put our development players in against the Irish development players, and then our best players go off and cross the Severn, because it's much easier for a Welsh player to drive up to Gloucester and play. And I know we should be analysing the Six Nations as the Six Nations, and we should be, the performance is the performance and the coach is the coach, but it's so hard not to veer away from that because these players are not really being set up to succeed right now. Yes, it's the right at the start of the system, and the professional contracts are welcome, and the facilities in Abbottstown are incredible, and the investment and the support structures they have are really, really good. But the players are trying to make a leap from competitions that are nowhere near this because the structures beneath this have all been neglected, and it can't just be Team Ireland out in Abbottstown. It has to go way deeper than that.
Yeah, sorry, Grace.
Yeah, and I think, what we say there, we haven't suddenly just become a smaller nation of rugby players. We've always been slight in stature. We've never been able to match the like of France or New Zealand, bar, a couple of exceptions. So that's not something suddenly we've turned up and go, oh my God, we've got so much smaller. That's always been the case, and we've always developed a game plan around that where we used our pace, we used our skill set, we used our speed and our work rate to evade and to find a space, and it's what Rory is saying. I think what we're seeing now is for so long we covered over the cracks, we concealed the cracks. When we look back at 2017, it's a good while since that now, and we've been papering over the cracks, and now the cracks have come, and as Rory says, the underneath is not there now. The purpose of people coming up through is not there, and I think that's why it's now we're seeing it. But it's from previous, for the last decade really that it's been struggling.
Yes, there are. I was reading 188,000 female registered GAA players, adults. There are 8,000 rugby players in the country, so that'll give a sense of the disparity in numbers. I think, Grace, it'd be worthwhile for lots of listeners just to give a helicopter view of the situation in Ireland. People would have seen it was announced to great fanfare, the professional contracts late last year. Close to 30 players, mid-20 players have accepted those contracts. So you take the starting 15. I had a look just to check. I wasn't sure what the situation was. If you take the starting 15 from Saturday, Aoife Doyle, Nastasia Behan, Nicole Cronin, Molly Scuffil-McCabe, Sive McGrath. I'm not too sure her situation. She may well have been given a contract subsequent to when I last checked. But certainly Nicola Friday, Sam Monaghan, 2 of Ireland's main players, and the flanker Maeve O'Leary. Those 8 are not contracted. They're not at the high performance unit. I know, are all of them over in England, or are some of them just part-timers staying in Ireland? I know certainly Nicola Friday's over in England, and Sam Monaghan and 1 or 2 others. So give us the kind of uneven sense of Irish professionalism. And as Rory mentioned, you take England, they're all in the English League, French all in the French League, give or take, and Wales have basically none in their own league, but they're all playing in England in the main, a bunch of them at Gloucester. So they're getting top level rugby. Scotland the same, a lot of Scottish players in the English League. The Irish picture is far more uneven. So those 8, for instance, from Saturday who aren't in the high performance unit, what are they doing to prepare for the Six Nations in the main?
So basically, the players, it's such a disparity, and it's such, they've the sevens players. There was actually a lot more sevens contracts last year. And what they've done is they've reduced the amount of sevens contracted players and added 15s players. So when you look at the grand scheme and they say the amount of 15s players that have been contracted, the numbers don't add up because they've actually lowered some of the sevens contracts. So there's not a huge gain in the amount of professional players from this year to last year. What a lot of those professional ones are younger development players. A lot of them you're not even seeing in this Six Nations purely because some of the contracts that were offered to players within Ireland were 15 grand. And most people, you have to be based in Dublin, you have to be in the high performance unit on a weekly basis. And most people were like, I'm not giving up my career for that. The players that were based in England, some of them are basically contracted, even if it's not very much money. They're contracted with clubs like Nicola Friday, with Exeter. You have Niamh Jones, Sam Monaghan, Del McMahon, who's currently out injured, Vicky Irwin. There's a lot of those players are playing in the English Premiership, and that's where they're based. So when you had the players that are based in Ireland coming off the back of the interprovincials, they went into the combined provinces. The Premiership players were still playing. They weren't involved. And then what happened was once the combined provinces were finished, there was Irish camp. And then Irish camp, there was one weekend where the English Prem were still playing. So there was an extended Irish squad without those English Premiership players. And then there was a couple of weekends or extended squads or squad sessions with the English Premiership. So they haven't had much time as a unit. And I think that's where this cohesiveness is. And Rory touched on it. When you look at a lot of the RFU reviews, as much as we don't want to delve into the background, one of the big key issues there was the development of the front five players. And currently, Linda Jungang is probably the most renowned name that is on a contract. The rest aren't. And you're going, how do we develop the strength in our engine room if they're not there as a unit? Yes. And we see Wales like dominated in the maul. They were an 8 working together, and Ireland defending the maul just looked like individuals trying to hit a steam train. So you can see that as the unity is going to take a while to come. Yes.
And so just a very quick follow-up, the players in the high performance unit, they're training away. The likes of Nicola Friday and Sam Monaghan and Niamh Jones, they're getting very good competitive games in the English Premiership. Those other players who aren't in the high performance unit or in the Premiership, are they just trucking along playing AIL and trying to get up to Irish training when they can? Is that what that quotient are doing?
Yeah, there seemed to be ones that were in the Irish squad last year, were offered contracts and then said, no, I can't afford to take that contract. Yeah. And some were deemed, whether on their own basis, whether there is space for them if they refuse a contract, are they wanted into camp? That's something that's a bit ambiguous at the minute. Whether, I can't take a contract, but I'm happy to play for Ireland. I don't think it's acceptable if you're in Ireland and doing that. Fair enough, the English players maybe have a bit more of an excuse. But basically what they're playing now, the AIL finished at Christmas. They're now playing like an All-Ireland Cup. Some of the clubs don't believe it's a high enough standard. There's a lot of disparity between the levels, even more so the AIL. Also, a lot of clubs, the likes of Railway Union or Belvedere are losing a lot of players due to the combined provinces, which led to like a lower level of club game as well. So there's a lot of a knock-on because of that combined provinces. Okay. It's good to get that sense of things. So it's uneven, Rory, as you might expect, to be fair in the early stages of professional, but it's not conducive to high performance. You've got the English players probably in reasonable shape and playing good games. You've the likes of Linda Jungang. I don't know who she's scrummaging against in the high performance unit. I'd say it's pretty lonely. And then you've got other players playing at a standard part-time, which isn't preparing them for Six Nations. And then they all come together and it's over to Cardiff and best of luck. So we're still a way away from a good system. Yeah, and I think one little quick fix that you could put in place is a friendly before it all begins. It's not something I was calling for a couple of weeks ago. I was fairly knee deep in the men's Six Nations, but what harm would it have been to play 80 minutes against even if it is one of the Six Nations teams? I think Wales played against South Africa before they played against Ireland, so whatever kinks that were there, they got out of their system, because
I'm sure they looked amazing in training. I'm sure training was going really well because they won the combined provinces against inferior players from Wales and Scotland. And look, I know that they weren't sold on that. I know that they didn't get carried away on the back of that because they knew this wasn't the level. But I'm sure there needs to be some sort of, even the fact that they play AIL to Christmas, then they do Interpros, then combined provinces into the Six Nations. It's all supposed to be step upon step upon step. So maybe the step they're missing is an international before that, and they hope that the combined provinces thing will, which will become Leinster and Munster, I think, playing in a 6-team competition next year, will increase the standard and will give, will get better as it goes on, and they'll be able to, get broadcasters involved and there'll be people at the games, because that wasn't even, it was played behind closed doors effectively. Like, there was in empty stadiums. It wasn't real. It wasn't real rugby. And then you go from that to Six Nations. It's just a huge jump. And John McKee, the senior coach who they brought in, former men's Fiji coach, he said it in the media yesterday, they have plans to put in place to play games in the summer. So that will be good, because they need games at this level. They need to test themselves, and it's possibly no harm they're not going to qualify for this women's 15s, because I think getting hockeyed over and over again is not going to do this young team any use. Even though they want to be at the top table, I think they need to earn their way to get there.
Yeah, it's worth stating the average number of caps in the Irish 15 on Saturday was 7, and then the average number off the bench was 4. Like, only Nicola Friday and Linda de Jugang had 20 caps or more each. So again, it was a real baptism of fire, which brings us, Grace, to Musgrave Park, and they'll be desperate in front of a home crowd to put on a better show. It's France coming, who laboured a touch almost akin to the men's team at the start of the men's Six Nations away to Italy. It was in Parma. They have a touch of transition going on. However, that Wales scoreline with France coming to 10, that is a bit scary. What are you expecting from this game?
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult game, and it's going to be difficult mentally. It's going to be difficult physically. Even the wariness of knowing that France are coming after you. I think France are going to be not happy with their performance against Italy. This is a well trained Italy team. They're constantly improving. We see in the last couple of years they like to play good rugby. Bit like the men, sometimes they're a bit haphazard, but over the last 2 years we've definitely seen a lot of that offloading game stick. They play off the cuff. It's really exciting rugby. France made a lot of mistakes. It was really atrocious weather towards the end of the match, but they built into it because of those changes. They're missing the likes of Safi Ndiaye, who's huge physically. Menarget is out injured, and Fall is out injured, but the guys that stepped into their shoes did really well, and they were very exciting. And I think, they're going to want to come and prove themselves and prove, that they're not as sluggish as they were against Italy. I think they'll look at the analysis of Ireland, and, we know the French, that they really were dominant in the scrum against Italy, and Italy a couple of times took them. So Italy have a strong scrum, but I think that's going to be a real area of concern. Ireland are going to have to lower the height, get work as that 8, tighten up the seams and try and drive power straight through. France are going to attack on a maul, because if any team looked at that defence, and a big concern is the centre defence. Vernier had an absolute unbelievable game. And the thing is, Ireland looked like they couldn't get any go forward ball. They went out the back too often and shipped the ball across the pitch without hitting any gain line. Yeah. I think Ireland or France, what they'll do is they'll pin them back. We've seen Tremillier come on, who's an amazing 10, huge experience, and she was just pinning the ball back. She's like such a long boot on her, and I've no doubt she'll just pin Ireland back and say, right, try and work your way out from here. And I think it will be a long day in the office. Like, France hit extremely hard. They always have. I've been very sore after their games, and they're hugely physical. So even new players coming in, they're going to want to exert their dominance on this Irish team.
Sort all that out by Saturday, Rory.
Well, I think you keep it simple, don't you? You go in and you identify the 3 things you want to get right, and if you get those right, then at least when the players come into the dressing room, regardless of the result, you say to them, I asked you to get 3 things right. You got those right. Let's get 3 more things right the next day. And go. Do
you make the scrum one of those things?
Well, it's very hard to fix a scrum in a week, and especially with such an experience a prop. But they will surely be better for the experience of another week. I know it's not a full week together because some of the players will go back to England and then come back in for camps, and that's part of the issues that are blighting them. But even the experience of last week, like you would expect them, they froze last week to some degree, and I can't imagine they'll freeze again. I think there'll have to be some sort of emotional response, and there's in rugby there's a lot to be said for emotion. It's fear is the fear of failure in front of your home fans on national television. It's such a difficult stage for these players. Even the fact they're doing media, they're mirroring the men's media schedule. They're out 4 days a week at the moment. It's very, very difficult for them. Now, it's right because it shines a light. Every organisation is only as strong as the weakest link, and the RFU can't just bask in the glory of the men's Six Nations success. This is an indictment on the system that the men are this good and the women are down here. That can't be sustained. It can't be allowed to be sustainable. They have to be investing. And they are investing resources and money in it, but it's got to be smart as well. They've got to be seeing this as a major issue, but it's very hard to catch up because everyone else is investing and everyone else is, like we've seen Wales in 2 years go from being hammered by Ireland to hammering Ireland. So it's a difficult job, and it's a difficult place for these players to be. I feel sorry for a lot of them because they're not being there's no experience in that dressing room. A lot of, if they qualify for the World Cup, I think some of the players who were involved, that last minute try was such a sliding doors moment. There was retirements. They lost Ciara Griffin. They lost a lot of leadership from that time, and it's such a new team, and it's a hard place to learn.
Yeah, Grace, 2 last questions in one. Give us your prediction. Like, what is an acceptable afternoon for Ireland, and what do you think will happen? And just before that, it was also a feature on Saturday that it was hard to work out at times who was playing where. It was very chopped up as the game went on. Are there any changes that you would expect to see for Saturday?
As much as Sive grew into the game, I think, maybe get O'Dowd in there, or get Chrissy Haney in and move Linda Jungang over, get a bit of confidence. We need good set piece. I think Nicole Cronin, if they're looking at development in this team, then, let's develop, why then bring in, one of the players that has been around for a long time. I think Dan O'Brien has a great left boot on her. She's shown that at the Interpros, and, in Japan, she had a great first game. So I think give her more time. She still has to learn in her decision making sometimes. She kicks a little too often, but has a really good pass, and I think I'd like to see her. I think Enya Breen, there might be concern about her being injured, which is going to be interesting for centre-wise. Okay. But I think those two things are crucial, and I think the key for this weekend is sort out that defence, get your spacing, and put this France team under pressure like Italy did. If you sit back and let this France team run at you, they'll come all day. And the other thing, so the defence is the key thing. And then when we do have the ball in attack, I think we need to be direct. We need to be smart about it. We can't just drift across the pitch. We need to literally vary it, find the gaps, go direct, try and get the quick ruck ball and move it. But as you said, it was just some people were throwing. It was like there was no game plan, so it's getting that structure back into play. And I think maybe Dana might bring that at 10.
So what do you think will happen? What's your prediction? And what no, you've dodged that one beautifully. I would dodge it myself maybe. And so what do you think will happen? And what do you think would be a fair enough day? Because let's not put, it's unrealistic to say, Ireland could nick this. They're probably going to lose. So what would be an acceptable loss, and what do you think will happen?
I think like getting that performance. So I think, getting phases of attack and getting over the gain line and playing in the right areas of the park is going to be a positive. I think I've no doubt France can get four tries, and as much as I want Ireland to go out and show what they can do and win, I think France getting 4 tries, that will be a given unless a tsunami of weather changes the situation. But I think if it's a dry night, France will run riot. I think it's hard to know what is success in this. I think it's not the simple try. If someone beats you and goes through 5 phases, 6 phases and burns you, I think, fair enough. But when we look at the weekend, 2 minutes in, we get a penalty off a scrum and maul, it's a try. We get a break off for first phase, it's a try. I think we have to make France work for it. So I think if we limit France to scoring off third, fourth phase, fifth phase, then I think, yeah, that's pretty successful.
Okay. One last quick thought, Rory, for the tournament as a whole. For England, it was a great day. Sarah Hunter bid farewell. They put close to 60 points on Scotland, a Scottish team who weren't actually as bad as the scoreline would have suggested. It was 58-7. But it is an issue for this tournament that almost each weekend, the England-France games, from a neutral point of view, if you're there with your remote and you're watching across Saturday or Sunday of an afternoon, too many of these games are incredibly lopsided. And then from a tournament overview, if you were to be uncharitable about it, you could say, well, the only game you need to watch is the game in the last round between England and France. That's the decider, and we understand why that is, and the sport is coming from a lower base, but they're gonna, if this thing is to grow, they have to bring all the nations up to something approaching equitable in the next 5-10 years, if that's even possible.
I think the World Cup, you could have a similar criticism. You could throw New Zealand into the mix, but there was a lot of one-sided games at that tournament, and I think that's just the nature of women's rugby. That there's three or four really strong teams, and that the rest are quite far off that level. And I'm not sure what World Rugby or the Six Nations can do about it. It really is up to the teams themselves to hitch themselves up and
give money and ring fence it, maybe. Well, I'm sure they're doing that.
Well, look at the men's. Like, the men's is a much broader church. So it's like the teams who are able to compete at men's level, there's no reason why the team that they can't compete at women's level as well. They have obviously got a system that works for them in the men's side, and it's not a case of copying it, but it's putting the brains behind all of that to achieving it. And it's going to take a while, and it's going to closing the gap, like how England have retirements and the coaching change coming, and maybe they'll come back to the pack a little bit, but the sheer weight of playing numbers is on their side, and they've got the best competition, and France have a good competition, and New Zealand have their own model, and that works for them as well. So it's up to Ireland. There's no help coming from anywhere else. It's up to the Irish system to close that gap themselves.
What would worry you is that this Irish system has been gifted the greatest privately funded schools academy in the history of world sport. Gifted it.
Yeah.
So the RFU can talk about the many great things they're doing, and they're doing lots of great things, I'm sure, but they have just been gifted rugby's version of La Masia and all these kids coming through. IRFU have not had to build from the ground up successfully club players coming through and put together a programme.
Yeah.
And that is
it's hard.
A concern, and it's hard. But
yeah.
they can't say, how did we do it in the men's?
But they are one of the only professional programmes for women's athletes in Ireland. And there are currently how many WAFL players who are crossing the world to play professional sport for not a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
If they get their house in order, then your Vicky Wall's heads will be turned, and you can get those athletes in.
Yeah.
But your house isn't in order at the moment. Like, why would Vicky Wall walk into that team and get hammered on national TV 5 times a year? Like, that's a challenge right now. They need to get the top athletes in. I know you were talking about John Cronin's piece in the Sinlo in the pay-per-view the other day, and I think it's really well worth reading both of them. Not everyone agrees with John, and people will take him to task on certain things, but he's obviously sat down and thought about this an awful lot. And there is a collection of athletes, right? Sorry, if you're a young girl in Ireland, what would you want to play? Do you want to play football and go to the World Cup? Do you want to play Gaelic in Croke Park with the little sponsorship and the big games? Maybe go and play in Australia for a while? Or do you want to play rugby the way it's set up right now? Rugby's losing, but there's no reason rugby needs to lose forever. And it is a challenge for the IRFU because there is no school system there, but there are good athletes if you build the right framework for them to play. Big problem is there's not enough good games across a year to keep them interested, and that's all the bigger picture stuff that we only ever talk about this time of year because Six Nations brings it into focus. But it's important that we do, because the women's AIL just operates in the shadows from one end of the year. Well, not even from one end of the year to the other. It doesn't even go the whole length of the season. It's crazy. There's so many structural issues that are there, and I think you're right. Because the school system isn't there, they'll be made to work much, much harder to identify the athletes. And at the moment, it's not happening for them.
Okay, clock is against us. Grace and Rory staying with us. We're going to turn our attention to Heineken Champions Cup. It's back all of a sudden this weekend. It's hard to get your head around it in some respects. Our rugby and off the ball is with Vodafone, proud supporter of the Irish women's rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Quick ad break, and we'll look ahead to the round of 16 in the Heineken Champions Cup next.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now you're very welcome back. Grace Davitt is with us, as is Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent. So Heineken Champions Cup round of 16 this weekend. All of a sudden, the URC weekend that was pretty interesting. Munster 26, Glasgow 38 was a disappointing result at Thomond on Saturday. Ulster are now winning games again, 32-23 against the Bulls. Connacht 41, Edinburgh 26, and then Friday night, Leinster 22, Stormers 22 was an exceptional game. Proof once again, the best games in the URC are when Leinster give the opposition double-digit leads and then decide to chase them down. So that was amazing fare. This weekend coming, Munster arrived this evening in South Africa. They're in Durban to take on the Sharks. That is 12:30 Irish time on Saturday, 12:30 Irish time on Saturday. Leinster play Ulster at 5:30 also on Saturday, and then Benetton Connacht is 3 o'clock also on Saturday. So feast of rugby Saturday between Women's Six Nations and Heineken Champions Cup. It does. It's tough, Grace, to go from Men's Six Nations International, Women's Six Nations on to get suddenly, oh my God, here we go, Champions Cup, but we're here.
Isn't it, the amount of games that are on, and you're finishing watching the Women's Six Nations and then you're going, oh right, there's more rugby on the TV. But yeah, and it's great, those guys have to get themselves back to ground and start focusing after winning a Grand Slam and go, right, clubs are back, what way are they doing, and start building up into this Champions Cup, and knowing now it's the next job. You can't wallow too long in your own success and have to build up again and see, can you perform and get back into your club and go back into their systems and structures as well.
Well, Rory, we might rely on you a touch here, because as we were doing England-Scotland on Virgin, and we walked out at one stage to see that Glasgow against Munster were 31-0 up after 50 minutes. And after laughing at Fiona Hayes, we did wonder what had happened. So you can tell us what had happened.
Well, Glasgow were very good. That doesn't account for 31-0 though. It was quite a poor performance for Munster at the worst possible time as well. And all the stuff that we talked about at the start of the season, the defeats that they were having then and not getting a bonus point against Zebre has kind of almost been forgotten, because they had that lovely period since the South Africa game where they were winning games and they were pushing Toulouse close, pushed Leinster relatively close as well. But it meant that they've no wiggle room, and suddenly they've lose to Glasgow in this manner, and they're under enormous pressure on two fronts now to try and get into next year's Champions Cup. And it was a lot of it of their own making. Now, Glasgow picked a few more of the Scotland starters in their team. They're in the Challenge Cup, so they didn't necessarily have to focus on this weekend. So also they weren't celebrating anything in the way that Ireland were. But Munster were really only without O'Mahony and Murray, from the Champions Cup, from the Six Nations squad. They had a strong team on paper out there, but a little bit like the women's team, they just didn't show. They didn't. They left it in the dressing room. They came out and looked like it was going to happen for them. And Glasgow came out and played a really nice brand of rugby. Nigel Carolan is their attack coach, the former Ireland Under-20s coach, and if they're playing like that, it won't be long before the RFU are looking to get him home in some capacity, because it was really, really incisive, sharp, good handling. The kind of rugby actually Glasgow probably played under Townsend when they won this league, nearly a decade ago, and they actually look like they're a relatively strong threat for the league now on the basis of what they performed in Thomond. But Munster will be really, really worried about some of the missed tackles, some of the softness in the pack, the disjointedness. No one had played together for a while, so it's not like it's an excuse. Everyone was going to have a little bit of that. I think this weekend's game against the Sharks was probably on their mind, but Munster have long since passed the point where they could sack off a URC game and go and focus on the Champions Cup. That's not. They need to be in the Champions Cup next year, and it spoke to a little bit of the old malaise that was there, that we kind of had thought they'd moved on from, and maybe they're going to have days like this, but it leaves them in a really real bind now for the rest of the season. Yeah.
Graham Rowntree speaking during the week, talked about a very honest review of that Glasgow game. I should stress, by the way, before someone tweets in to say you were laughing at Munster, proof you hate Munster, I was laughing at Fiona Hayes' distraught reaction to Munster. It's a subtle but important difference. Durban is at sea level, Grace, but temperature will be in the mid-20s. There's talk of high humidity. It seems Munster have been communicating with the other Irish provinces who've played down there just to get their sense of preparation. And Graham Rowntree was saying that they have been doing some heat training, which is interesting. So he said, we've been topping up on heat training. What he said of Sharks was they can play, crikey. They've got some pace on the edges. They've got a monster pack, very similar to playing against Toulouse, I'd say. They're big, they're heavy, and they're quick. This is a serious ask away from home for Munster. How do you see this?
Yeah, it's kind of, they're going to want to bounce back from that loss to Glasgow. They're going to want to put in the performance and show what they can do. But yeah, it's a big ask. It's away from home, with that change of temperature, humidity, and already with that mindset of, oh my God, these are huge, they're big, they're going to move the ball around, and they have to get that mindset right of what way they're going to play, how are they going to close them down, stop that offloading game, try and slow down the rucks. But because of that physicality and because away from home, I just can't see them getting over the line. I think it'll be closer than we think, but I still think, it's a big journey to go to get yourself after that game, get all the way to South Africa, and then try and put in the performance as well.
Sharks on paper are ridiculous, but they're the 8th best team in the URC right now. They lost to the Scarlets on Saturday night with a full team. They've Etzebeth, Khaleesi, they've Bongli Ombanambi. They have incredible players, but they don't seem to be able to put it all together. If they do on Saturday, then there's not many teams in the world who could live with them. Not least Munster, who are in very much a developmental phase, who've lost their best tight head to New Zealand for a few months before he comes back, who are missing Ty Byrne. But there has to be something to be said for Munster's pedigree in this competition, for their experience of playing knockout rugby in the Champions Cup over 25 years. This is Sharks' first knockout game in this tournament. The South Africans, I think, are still grappling with the idea that this is bigger than URC. I think the URC is still a big deal for them in a way that, like, that's their Super Rugby in some ways. And obviously they understand that this is a bigger competition, but the pool format was so uninspiring that they're not really seeing what the big deal is about this now. And a lot of their players would have played in Europe over the years, like Etzebeth. They know that this is a big deal, Munster coming to town. But for them, it may be, especially because they can't play a semi-final in South Africa, that because of the way the tournament was brokered, they have to go to Europe regardless. They may see the URC as a better route to silverware, and they are in a position where they need to win their last 2 games to get into the knockouts and to get into this competition next year. They may be more willing to kind of go, do you know what, we don't necessarily need a trip to Toulouse next week to play a European game, that this is not the be-all and end-all for us. So I can see a way of Munster winning on their own merits, because they have the nous and O'Mahony's back and Murray comes back either starting or on the bench, and they have all of that experience of European rugby, for want of a better phrase, because it's not in Europe anymore, and it's new to the Sharks, and the Sharks just don't ever live up to the sum of their parts. So Munster could surprise us. It's actually the one in 3 weeks' time, I think, where the Sharks will come out even stronger and try and blow them away, because Munster have to go back to South Africa in 2 weeks anyway. So Munster's schedule is, if they win this, they go play Toulouse away probably, and then they're back to South Africa for 2 games. So it's a lot of air miles, and it's going to be really, really intense. I think this is the one they probably have the best chance of winning.
Okay, interesting. So that's 12:30 Saturday. Leinster Ulster's 5:30. Leinster 22, Stormers 22 was great game. I mean, many people have made the point, Rory, that this is everything that people hoped the Stormers would bring, or sorry, the South Africans would bring, and the Stormers did. And they brought a strong team as well. Further to your URC point, I was reading that some of the players were told, do you want to stay home and prep for Europe, or do you want to go and take on Leinster? And there was an overwhelming hands in the air majority, let's go take on Leinster, and it was a great game. Leinster had to come back again. You never really doubt they will most of the time.
I did on Friday night. I was there, and it was, and like, the Stormers brought their, how many World Cup winners? They certainly had the 2 World Cup winning props from the bomb squad starting, and they were winning collisions. They were dominant at scrum time. Their maul was strong. Their backs looked electric. For the first 20 minutes, it really did look like Leinster were in trouble. And like, this is Leinster's B team, and ultimately someone is going to beat them someday. Unfortunately, I tipped Edinburgh to do it during the Six Nations, which was one of my bigger follies, but they will lose someday, and they came very close on Friday night, but they found a way to win it
and they did go 5 up with 10 minutes to go.
Yeah, and they had a kick, Harry Byrne had a kick to win it at the end, and he missed a couple of conversions, so probably even John Dobson, the Stormers coach, said it would have been a bit of a burglary if we'd won this game, that the Leinster were the better team over the course of the 80 minutes, and that's that's what he told. I had a chance to chat to him before the game, and it was him who said that. And this weekend's big for them because they're playing the Harlequins at their own stadium, and they're both sponsored by DHL, and DHL sponsored the stadium, so it's a big deal from them from a corporate point of view. There's going to be 50,000 at that game. It's a big event, and they are the URC champions, so they feel like they're flying the flag for South Africa and feel like they're the strongest region and they're probably the best set up to cope on two fronts. So they'll be back in Dublin for a final, I would think. If things go their way, they may, the way things are lining up in the URC, the South African teams all have 2 home games to finish off, so they should finish strong. And I mean, they should have I think Leinster's plan is to play all of their remaining home games, whether knockout or there's only knockout games to come in the Aviva. They should have no problem in shifting game tickets for the Stormers game, because it was just an incredible clash of styles. It was really good, and it brought out the best in a lot of those Leinster players, and the likes of Rhys Ruddock, Luke McGrath, guys who probably won't be involved or might be benched this weekend. But God, they contribute some amount to that Leinster effort across the season, and they can just call. They know they can call on them if they're ever needed. Ross Maloney, just one of these unsung heroes who has yet to be capped, but is such an important player in one of the best organisations in world rugby. It's a frightening squad and a frightening level of depth.
It sure is. Grace, I know you didn't catch that game, so I won't put you on the spot, but you can get the ball rolling on Leinster-Ulster 5:30 on Saturday. Ulster were very confusing for a lot of the season when the crisis hit. They have steadied the ship, certainly. So they beat the Bulls 32-23. They have beaten Cardiff 42 points to 20 away. I appreciate Cardiff aren't in a great place. They beat the Sharks 31-24, and they beat the Stormers at home 35-5. They lost to Glasgow 17-11, but that is 4 wins in 5 since the 27th of January. So again, it does not mean they're scary good or anything at the moment, but the ship has been more than steadied. It just feels like a very hard thing to make a case for them realistically against Leinster at the weekend. It's partially one of the reasons I would say there isn't great hype about this game, like All-Ireland knockout European tie, and it hasn't really captured the imagination.
It's really sold out.
In the media, I mean.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's going to sell out, of course it will, yeah.
It will, yeah, it'll sell out. And, I think Ulster really want to put it up to Leinster. We had that other interprovincial game where last minute the game was called off, or they had to call it early and it was moved to the Aviva and it was behind closed doors. And you look Ulster going to the Aviva now to face Leinster, and they're going to want to put on a show. They know it's in Leinster's backyard. They know what they're going to bring, and I think they'll have that confidence. We've seen the players like Tom Stewart doing really well, and that's with the likes of Rob Herring missing from Ulster. I think Ian Henderson will be a huge loss, obviously, with his injury. But yeah, it's good that they're winning, and it's kind of what you said with Leinster, winning becomes a habit, and we've seen Ireland do it against Australia, grinding out them ugly wins, and Leinster are somehow able to do that consistently. And for Ulster to start winning again, start getting that belief in, and I think even on Saturday or at the weekend there with the match, they were letting Bulls back into the game. It was only Bulls ill-discipline that they could have had a kick for touch to level that game. So I think Ulster will need to still step it up another mark to kind of make any impact on this Leinster team. Yeah,
fair point on sellout. That's really good. When I say capture the imagination,
look, when I saw Stephen Cluxton on the pitch on Sunday, I knew Mbappe was in town. I was like, this is going to be a nice quiet week.
Yeah.
So the media can only has so much oxygen for. But I think Leinster have done a really good job of selling this from a long way out.
Yeah.
But I think by Friday there will be a fair bit of buzz.
Okay. About this. I suppose I just mean no one at the water cooler is going, geez, what do you think's going to happen at the weekend?
Yeah, we're still analysing what went wrong for Ireland on Saturday on Monday night and all of that stuff. So it's been a busy week. And it's one of rugby's big challenges with the championship coming back earlier as well. It's as the season ends, there's less and less room for rugby to breathe, and Six Nations sucks up so much energy, and the Women's Six Nations is doing that as well.
Yeah.
It is. You're right. There's less talk about it, but they've managed to sell it. Well, pretty much sell out the Aviva. Yeah. I think on the back of the Six Nations stuff, and I think it's going to be a really good game. I think Ulster. I can make
bring it.
I think. Well, I mean, all you have to do is go back to 2019 and that quarter final. Very fresh off of Six Nations now. It was a much less successful Six Nations, but they brought a lot to that game, and they nearly knocked Leinster out. Ross Byrne on one leg knocked over a last minute kick to win it. If Stockdale had not knocked the ball on in that pivotal moment for his career, never mind that game.
Can I interrupt? How much faith do you put in Ulster's recent wins, really?
None, because the form line in the URC is so difficult to gauge. Last weekend was the best round of the URC. It was the best advertisement for URC because, and even then there wasn't the full teams, but the Stormers win. Like, they hammered the Stormers, but the Stormers sent over a B/C team. Yeah. So at this time of year, it's very, very difficult. This is the best time of year for club rugby because everyone's available, everyone's back. Where I put more stock into is Leinster's 2 wins over Ulster this season. Having lost twice to them last year, the way they outmuscled them up in Ravenhill in the rain in particular, the form of Ryan Baird in that game, Jason Jenkins' performance, the way they've added a bit of steel to their pack this season, and the way they, Ulster were, what was the score at half-time or coming up to half-time in the RDS? Was it, they were 20 points up?
It was
pretty
a
much.
lot, yeah.
And they turned around and they
King
basically
Healy
broke Ulster's season for 2 months on that night. But Ulster were good enough at the RDS against a very strong Leinster team to build a lead and weren't good enough to hold on to it. And that would be the fear, obviously. You can't write this Leinster team off, as we've already discussed. But if they can get ahead, if they can bring the storm, if the Leinster players struggle to adapt back into the calling system, if they're still mentally in Gary Ringo's basement, haven't had the celebrations, there's a lot of Ulster players who will feel like this is their chance to get into a World Cup. Like James Hume, Mike Lowry, they were all captain the last year and have dropped off the system altogether. Jacob Stockdale, I didn't see him in the celebrations. I think the whole squad were there, but I didn't see if Stockdale stuck around. He was in every training session for Ireland across the Six Nations. Larmer was as well on the Leinster side, but there's a lot fewer Leinster players who have a point to prove, whereas the Ulster players have a huge motivation, as well as the fact that they haven't won this thing in a long time. And Sexton's not there, so that's a little bit of a levelling up, as much as we all rate Ross Byrne and think that he's having a very good season. So there's a case to be made that if Ulster get things right, if they can get their maul going, their maul scored, was it 3 tries against the Bulls on Friday night or on Saturday night? Yeah. They have a lot of weapons. They're not as good as Leinster, but I do think they're a very, very good team. They're one of the best teams in Europe who, if they on their day, could take out nearly anyone if they get it right. And if Leinster are off it at all, they'll have to be wary. And just judging by their media on Monday, they are quite wary of this Ulster team.
I retract everything. You've captured my imagination. You've locked it up and thrown away the key. I'm sold, Grace. I'm far more into this game all of a sudden.
Yeah, he's put doubt in your mind that Ulster might do it, hasn't he?
Yeah, okay, well that's appetising. I'll go along with that.
Generally, these all-Irish games take on a life of their own. I know Leinster Connacht second leg last year was a bit one-sided, and the 2012 final between these two teams was very one-sided. But think of Craig Gilroy dancing down the touchline in Thomond Park and knocking the Munster Kingpins out in 2012. Yeah, the 2 Leinster-Munster games in Croke Park and in Lansdowne Road as it was then, and that Ulster game a couple of years ago. They have this. Rob McBride said something interesting the other day. He said when you look at the stats of Leinster's games across the season, the Leinster forwards coach, everything drops. All of their standards drop in the provincial games. So their lineouts get worse. Their metres per carry gets worse. Everything drops because the Irish players know them better. They're more motivated. Often the conditions are crap as well, which doesn't help. But the provinces are able to bring Leinster closer back to the pack than other teams are. And if Ulster can do that, then they've got a shot.
Okay. Sold, 100%, 5:30.
2 tickets left.
Yeah,
Leinster can send me an invoice.
They should hire you. Oh my God. The last of the tickets have just been bought. Grace, very, very final word. I don't know even what question to ask about Johnny Sexton anymore. We've talked about him so much, but it is worth stating that it would appear he's played his last game for Leinster, and maybe he knew how serious the injury is when he walked off against England, and that explained the demeanour, which was very, very frustrated. But he had such a fitting finale for Ireland. That is not a fitting finale for Leinster, unfortunately. Proof that sport is cruel.
Yeah, and the majority of players don't get the swan song that they deserve. There's very few that go out. We've seen Sarah Hunter do it the weekend. We've seen Brian O'Driscoll do it. And yeah, you can't get it at any level. I think to win a Grand Slam at home just before a World Cup, I don't think there'll be much to beat that. Yes, fair enough. He's a lot of caps for Leinster, but yeah, it kind of shows he knew it could be an old injury, that he knew was there. Sometimes we have ligaments holding on by a thread, and once it's gone, you're going, no, I'm in trouble here. So obviously we know he's going in for surgery for that, and I suppose all eyes now will be on his recovery, and how will he be going into World Cup? Will he be able to recover well enough? Will the fact that he not have game time, will he get back for the autumns? So Leinster's loss is wrapping him up in cotton wool for a World Cup to get the final swan song. So you know, there has to be a changeover at some point. So although it's not the way he would have liked it, why not let these other guys, you know, the likes of Harry Byrne, get an opportunity, you know, get more game time for Leinster, get to the big games, and not just say, right, you've got us through the URC, you've got us to the quarterfinals, now Johnny's back in. So why not let them get a bit of reward for the work that they are putting in behind the scenes? Because, you know, he isn't going to be there next year. And, you know, for Ireland, I suppose that the goal is we want them for the World Cup.
Yeah. We are out of time. Thank you both so much. Grace Davitt, Grand Slam winner, appreciate it. And Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent, thanks very much. Rugby on Off the Ball is thanks to Vodafone, proud supporter of the Irish women's rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.